a too-close-to-call election, Benjamin Netanyahu this week won yet another term as Israeli Prime Minister. Netanyahu has had a strained relationship with President Obama, and there's every indication that that will continue. The most glaring disagreement centers on U.S. plans to work out a compromise that would prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. This is a sticky wicket, isn't it, for everybody concerned? I think President Obama probably in the White House had his fingers crossed that Netanyahu would lose. Now he's won, so we're looking at another couple of years of stalemate and acrimony?
Seems like it. I thought I would point out there was a little bit of wishful thinking going on in the White House.
Yes, exactly.
Right? And it's probably worth acknowledging that Bibi, Mr. Netanyahu, he's proving he's one of Israel's best all-time politicians.
Oh, I would agree with you.
I mean, he decided to call an early election so that he could assemble a different coalition, since it's a parliamentary system and there are around 10 parties often elected. And in the end, it worked.
Well, also the last-minute pronouncement with regard to the Palestinian state didn't hurt as well.
Yeah.
And then the flip-flop the following day.
I don't know if maybe a little bit extra was read into that.
You think so?
Potentially.
Do you agree?
What do you think?
I think that was Bibi coming out, the inner Bibi coming out. This is somebody he was prime minister in the 1990s, and there is a tape of him in the early 2000s after he was prime minister boasting to a group of supporters that he's the guy who killed the peace process in the 90s. And what he said now corresponds with what's been going on, and the peace process has gone nowhere since he's been prime minister.
Well, you know, you've been here so many times that I neglected to introduce you, so I apologize. This is Scott Monje. He's from the Foreign Policy Association. I apologize. But, you know, getting back to the strained relationship here, I mean, it's clear. First, the Republicans invite Netanyahu to speak before Congress. Joe Biden is conveniently absent. The president doesn't meet with them. Netanyahu could have said no. He did not. He used it, a lot of people say, to further his political plans for re-election. Who knows what the situation was, but that was the first time that happened in U.S. history, and Jackie Guzda, that must be an insult not only to the president, but he must still be smarting about that and remembering it, most of all, going forward.
You know, definitely. Look, I don't think there's been any question about what side Netanyahu has been on. There is that old tape. However, he has insulted the United States a number of times. You know, I think that if there's going to be a two-state solution, that the biggest problem have been those settlements, especially in East Jerusalem, which is Arab territory. And when Joe Biden went over to speak in that area, Bibi announced that they were building 1,000 more, or 2,000 more settlements in that area, constantly. I mean, you know, we could go after incident after incident. I'm glad that finally he said it out in the open. And he also used that racist slant to get himself arrested. Boy, was that a Freudian slip.
Now, Dan, have you ever remembered U.S.-Israeli relations being this strained?
Oh, I mean, they've been, people forget, back in the Reagan administration, there was a little bit of pushback against Israel at the time, and there were arguments that maybe the Republican Party was not, you know, supporting Israel enough.
I recall that.
So there have been ups and downs in the relationship, and there's certainly Israel and AIPAC, the most influential interest group on foreign policy issues in the United States, representing Israel, have lots of connections to other players, including Congress, including the Republican Party. They've always been able to play kind of both sides of the party debate.
Scott Monje, what's
if you
at
go
the
way
core?
back to 1956, the U.S.
Sure.
de facto sided with the Soviet Union against Israel in the Suez Crisis.
Well, and you probably remember, when was it Israel actually shot at an American ship?
Oh, with the USS Liberty.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they don't hesitate to do what they
What's
decide
at
is
the
in their
core,
interest.
do you think, Scott Monje, of this? Is it that the President Obama is not as engaged in the Middle East and its problems as Netanyahu would like him to be, as former President George Bush was? What's at the core of this?
It's a fundamental difference in what needs to be done in the Middle East. I think if Obama is not going to agree with Netanyahu, then Netanyahu would prefer him to be less engaged, I think. But it's differences over what needs to be done in relation with the Palestinians and what needs to be done in relations with Iran. And Obama is sure, and I agree with him, that what he's pursuing is ultimately in the better interest of Israel than what Netanyahu is doing.
You mean President Obama?
Yes.
Well, why is Netanyahu insisting on, in my mind at least, a more muscular profile in the Middle East, where President Obama and Americans in general have seen what happened when we engaged Iraq and the mess that happened and ISIS emerging from the rubble and what's happening in Syria? That's what happens when we are so muscular engaged in a situation like that. What's wrong with this policy, and why doesn't Netanyahu see that?
Well, I'm not going to speak for Netanyahu here, but I agree. I think Obama has taken a different view. The people who complain that he's not a leader condemn him for leading when it's not in the direction they want to go in trying to neutralize a Palestinian threat by giving them some of what they're asking for instead of constantly frustrating them. The Palestinians are turning to the United Nations not because they think the United Nations can make them a state, but because they're trying to shake up Netanyahu into negotiating with them by trying to imply that they have some way of getting around him. Maybe they can
But the
get him to
election has
engage.
said the hard line in this case works, hasn't it?
It worked in getting him reelected.
Yeah.
Well, so just remember one other factor in the Middle East. The two central issues in the U.S.-Israeli relationship, I agree, are peace with the Palestinians, hopefully permanently, and changing relations with Iran and whether it continues its nuclear program. But something else has happened since since Prime Minister Netanyahu has been in office, and that is ISIS has risen and started beheading people, right?
They are a dangerous force, yes, we agree on that.
You could imagine that alone might push the Israeli electorate a little bit to the right, probably make it easier
Let me ask you the silly question that most Americans would be asking now. Let me just ask this. Why the mess that it is, and to a certain degree which we created with the invasion of Iraq, which some would argue for and against, why do we need to be engaged in that now? I don't believe that would help. So why isn't this understood?
It's so complicated.
So there you go. I asked the question and it's complicated.
There's one unmovable factor here, is that over the last 66 years, Israel has been occupying Palestine, the people of Palestine.
Yes.
And they have not moved. They've talked a good talk during the Oslo Accords, et cetera, and said, well, we'll give you a little more. We'll give you 15% of what you ask. In reality, what Israel has done, the actions that they have taken, they have shown no sign that they want the Palestinians to have their own state. And if they've got to move on that. If they don't move on that, it's going to continue to be a mess.
Well, that's been the question for
in terms of what the
eons.
Palestinians have asked for, if you go back to the beginning, they figured this is ours. You know, the Israelis have no right being here. It's our land. Why did they come?
Right.
After 50 years, you know, by the 90s, they're saying, okay, we'll accept the 20% that we thought was ours. The West Bank and Gaza, it's 20% of the total, we'll take that. They negotiated for 10 years, and the high point came in 2000 when they were offered basically 12%. Not 12% of the whole thing, but 12% of the 20%.
Right.
In little oases surrounded by the Israeli army. And people couldn't understand why they didn't accept that. So this is a source of abiding frustration on their part, and it's going to explode eventually. And just pretending that it's not a problem is not going to mitigate it any.
You got
That's
30
right.
seconds, Jackie. I'm sorry, 30 seconds. We're
Okay.
out of time.
Okay, I was at a think tank in Ramallah
Right.
about 5 years ago, and what they were saying then was that, you know, move this wall that you have put through our territory back to the 67 borders. Goes, you want your wall? You can have it. We'll help you build it. Just give us back our land.
Right.
But you can hear Netanyahu saying, we gave back Gaza and then got bombarded from
But
Gaza.
they
right?
controlled Gaza. They never really gave it
this
back.
is why
So it's going to take two to tango.
This is why this situation continues, and for many, many years to come, it will be so complicated to figure out. A lot of moving parts in the Middle East vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue and also Israel. And we're not going to solve it here, unfortunately, but we'll take another shot.
Give it a
15
try.
minutes.
Oh, we've run out of time. When we come back, the always popular lightning round, when we touch on some of the quirky and interesting stories this week. Stick around, we'll be right back.